Today, welcome to another edition of Red into Black. A couple of little things beforehand. I'm Stephen Michelle. I'm the Director of PCI Partners. We've got today Andrew McClellan, who's a Director of EDX, and I'll introduce Andrew in a second. We're going to take questions at the end of the session, and you'll see that there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So as we go through, if you want to ask questions, pop it into the chat, and when we get to the end of it, we'll take those questions and get Andrew to actually address them. So, Andrew, look, thank you very much for taking the time to present this particular topic today. It is very topical because insolvency is on the rise, and we're certainly very busy at the moment. And one of the issues that does come up all the time is the PPSR. So, any financed asset. We will look at that as, say, a liquidator to see whether or not the security is valid or not. And we certainly see a lot of cases where it's not. So I think the update on the PPSR is very, very topical in this environment. So Andrew, for those that don't know, is a friend of PCI and has been for a long time. But he was previously an insolvency practitioner and started the firm of Carson McClellan, which then eventually became PPB Advisory. In 2012, he joined EDX, which specialises in the PPSR, the Personal Property Securities legislation. He understands the thought processes of insolvency practitioners. So not many of us do, but congratulations on doing that. And in particular, he specialises in his business, specialises in this particular area. EDX has been around for a long time. It was founded in New Zealand, and there's very similar legislation in New Zealand relating to the PPSR. And EDX is a one-stop shop for the PPSR. EDX was acquired in March 16 by a public company, Vita, which is now Equifax. And a lot of you on the line today will know of Equifax because it's one of the largest credit references agencies in the world. So, Andrew, welcome today. I won't be doing too much talking apart from at the end. So I'll hand it over to you. And again, thank you very much for presenting this topic today.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for the opportunity. As mentioned, I do love doing what most people hate, which is the PPSR. And I've done it for the last 12 years full time. Today's presentation is the third one I've done to your group on the PPSR. So it's designed to be more of an update and just a quick 30-minute session on what's happening out there. Okay. I have two slides that are repeated out of about 17, and this is the only one, the first one and the last one. So this first one is just simply, what is the PPSR? It's always just good to know. I'm going to try and simplify it as best I can. It's not intended to be a technical session, but back in 2012, the PPSR was created. And the third point being, look, it really does kick in when an entity becomes insolvent. And as you would have found, Steve, and that's when you come across the PPSR and have to evaluate claims. And the important thing is that without correct registration, the insolvency practitioner will most likely keep your asset, even if you own it. So I try to come up with the world's simplest explanation because I often get people confused thinking what the PPSR is intended to do. So what does a PPSR registration mean? I really do think of it this way. All it is a public notice board that says, hey, I've got a written agreement, and that written agreement will list certain assets that are being used as security in the agreement. Those assets are invariably held by someone else. So there are 22 different types of PPS registrations I could do on the PPSR. I go to the written agreement, and the type of security in the written agreement will then determine which registration I need to perform. So I just want to emphasize this point. No written agreement, you can't do a registration. The written agreement may not be in existence yet, and you may want to do a registration if you've got a reasonable expectation that shortly you'll be entering into this written agreement. Again, the written agreement needs to have security in it. If there's no security, again, there's no registration. And I say that because I often get people wanting to register because they're owed money by someone else, to which I say, well, what's the security? Well, there's no security. They just owe me. That is not a registration to be performed under PPSR. The other thing is people often contact me when their client's about to go broke. They want to protect their assets. They want to do a registration. It's too late. A registration cannot protect past transactions. It can only protect future transactions. So if a customer is about to fail, it's going to be too late to register. The latest numbers. This hasn't changed as a slide. The numbers slightly changed, but the total of 10.3 million, I don't think it's changed for about 5-6 years. And I'm going to go through each type of these transactions to give you a feel for the sort of people who would be in businesses that would be using each of these different types of transactions. As I said, there's 22 categories, but the main ones are A, B, C, and D. There's 3.2 million searches per quarter. Now, that's a lot of searches. So people are often, and businesses are searching other companies and businesses to see, hey, who's registered against them. And they're also searching for motor vehicles, watercraft, see if anyone else has a serial numbered registration against a particular asset. I'm going to come up with a sweeping generalization, but of the 10 million, I'd say EDX has performed around about 2 million of them. So we're very, very heavily involved in the PPSR. If I could come up with the biggest generalization, yeah, I reckon 50% are still not registering or trying to do it themselves badly. So we've got a permanent business in basically registering for those who haven't registered, and for those who have, making sure they're doing it correctly. And let's just run through each of those categories. Other goods, there are 3.194 million. They're those businesses that sell goods on credit under a retention of title clause, or they engage in long-term hire of plant and equipment. That tends to be your other goods, and is certainly, a very large portion of the registrations I do. Why do people register? They're selling goods under a retention of title clause, and they're the 5 benefits that they can get from registering. They can collect their unpaid stock if the insolvency practitioner is appointed. 2, we've done deals, we've had the insolvency practitioner really wanted my clients' unpaid stock, so they paid them for it. If you're on long-term hire of plant and equipment, you can pick up the equipment that you own. And if you haven't registered and you've hired out and what is defined as a PPS lease, you can lose the equipment that you owned to the insolvency practitioner. It does assist avoiding shoot-throughs. A shoot-through is someone who's got a business, they want to leave, go and live on the Gold Coast, sell their business, and then not pay creditors. As long as you have a registration over a business, it's going to be awfully difficult for that person to sell their own business, because anyone buying it will want clear title to the assets they're purchasing. And the assets that they're purchasing, the best way to ensure you're having clear title is having every registration removed. So you'll get requests because you registered, hey, could you please remove your registration? I'm trying to sell a business. It's an impediment to the sale. And you'll just say, I'm happy to discharge it. Please pay $41,315 today and we'll discharge it. So it's good to make sure that you're first in the queue. And there's some more, you do get some very good unfair preference protection as well. The second category, and this is very large for me because I register a lot of vehicles by their serial number. On the PPSR, there are only certain categories of assets you can individually register, which is really limited to watercraft, motor vehicles, and aircraft. And I've done a handful of aircraft and watercraft, so it's nearly all motor vehicles that I do. I act on behalf of a lot of motor vehicle financiers, manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers, and we register each of the motor vehicles. So that's basically, we register by the serial number, which 99% of the time is the VIN, and that allows financiers and motor vehicle dealers and owners to track their vehicle, so no one else can try and take their vehicle. So we do a lot of that. All PAPs, there's the third biggest category. That's all present and after acquired property. That's a charge over all the assets. So a banker would typically take that as security for a loan. So an all-PAP is a very common, because bankers, financiers, and lenders do it. I do a lot of intercompany loans, related party loans, where they actually do enter into a written agreement in the family business structure, and there is security being offered of all the assets. The last one I'll go, oh yeah, agriculture. That hasn't been a big one, but I do do some agriculture to protect live animals and crops and contributions to live animals. It's a bit more complex trying to recover in the agricultural space. But again, it is security if a loan goes bad. Of the other, the work that I will probably do, I do a lot of registering on behalf of landlords to protect a cash bond and fittings. Often shares is used as security. That's a different registration, yeah, and the odd boat. And again, the registering is done that if whoever has the asset goes broke, you can go and pick up your asset. Who's searching? I was quite staggered to see that really has increased. 3.2 million searches are done a quarter. Now, people aren't really buying and selling motor vehicles and boats unless they first search the PPSR, invariably by the VIN, just to see that no one else has a claim over the vehicle. Because if you buy someone's car, you then have, but you haven't checked the PPSR and there's a registration on it, you go to sell it in a few years' time, you may find you can't sell it because no one's going to buy it because there's a registration in the past over it. So you have to have the registration, the previous PPSR registration removed. I do a lot involved in selling businesses, which is what I just alluded to before. You have a business being sold and there might be 50 different PPSR registrations from 50 suppliers on that business. I will contact all 50 and ask them to remove their registration. Again, they'll only remove it unless my client has paid that supplier in full. So again, that's now becoming part of the business norm. Businesses do get sold, and when they are, someone will say, I'm happy to buy it, but I want to ensure I have clear title. Please remove all PPSR registrations. So it is powerful in making sure, again, in that instance, that you will get paid. And I know that Stephen, I think probably the first thing he'd do upon being appointed, and it's probably not even the second, the first thing would be they would search the PPSR for the entity that they've been appointed over to see what registrations are there, because they need to know themselves as insolvency practitioners. We've walked into business premises, we can see a lot of assets. What do we own? What don't we own? Who has a claim over which asset? And they don't want to sell assets, again, that they don't own. They want to make sure that they're dealing with only assets that they can deal with. So insolvency practitioners are also very much searching the PPSR. That's as far as the type of registrations we do and why. That's what I'm doing at the moment. And that tends to be the bulk of the work that I do. An interesting case developed, and there haven't been a lot of cases in the last 12 months since I last addressed this PCI. And it was PPSR versus Brookfield, which is in fact a person. And I think I've been waiting for the PPSR to start cracking down on people and businesses that use the PPSR for the wrong reasons. They cause trouble. And it's a way to cause trouble because, as I said, can't sell a business, trying to get a better negotiating position, put a registration on the PPSR and frustrate the process, even though you've got no right to do it. And I think you're going to find now the PPSR's tolerance for invalid and incorrect registrations is greatly reducing. They're now starting to crack down. And this is the first case. Brookfield put in an invalid registration over an entity. The entity went to the PPSR to say, please, I've asked them to remove it. They won't. The PPSR investigated and they said, you know what, it should be removed. There is no reason for it. They wrote to Brookfield and said, remove your registration. Brookfield didn't remove it and did nothing. They went to court, the PPSR, and said, no, we want penalties now. For the first time I've ever seen this. And the court went through the process, and I wasn't aware because I hadn't seen it before. There's trigger events everywhere that cascade. And the cascading effect of the fines related to how long is the invalid registration been there? When were you requested to remove it? How many times did they try and do it? And the actual total potential fine to Brookfield could have been $300,000 for not removing a registration when asked to do it. The court decided, look, we'll only fine $30,000 because it probably was the first time. But I think you're going to find, whether it be the courts, they're not going to tolerate people continually doing incorrect registrations and then not dealing with it when requested to remove it. In theory, you could do an invalid registration and you could just be hit with a fine. They'd just fine you anyway. I haven't seen that. They have gone through a process, But the lesson from that is this. I mean, I wouldn't do an invalid registration, and you can get advice from experts as to what is and what isn't an invalid registration. But if you are requested to remove it by the PPSR, please please just deal with it. And you may be right. You may have no reason to remove it, but you do need to deal with it. You cannot not deal with it. And I think that's just an important thing of the last 12 months. That's probably the number one case that's come out. I think after 12 years of the PPSR being in operation, the PPSR itself has been very patient in dealing with these invalid registrations. They're now getting to a stage. We're now going through the education process. It is now time to enforce against invalid registration. So be prepared that there's going to be a crackdown by the PPSR. As another update, there is likely to be some wholesale changes to the PPSR very soon. Now, back when the PPSR first started in 2012, part of the legislation was that in 3 years' time, a review had to be done as to the success or otherwise of the legislation and any improvements that could be recommended. That review was done 3 years later, back in 2015, by Mr. Whittaker. The PPSR and the government sat on that report for 8 years. Nothing changed, no comment, no feedback. And then late last year, they came out and said, we're now going to look at making all the wholesale changes recommended 8 years ago, with the aim being to simplify it. There's been a lot of kickback from the industry, and I think PCI is probably in the same boat. It's now 12 years old, this legislation. We've learnt to live with it. We've learnt to try and deal with it. And if you start making wholesale changes, it's a whole new education process. And whether it simplifies it or not, or even complicates the process more, would in fact be the great danger, I think. So I think you're going to see some changes. They will come through. There's hundreds that have been recommended. So it may mean a massive change. And it is trying to simplify it, because do we really need 22 different types of registrations? And if you've ever filled in one of the registrations, it's quite complex on the PPSR website. So I think there will be wholesale changes soon. Feedback has been given to the PPSR and the government. They're evaluating it. Who knows when they will come back, but watch this space. There will be some, undoubtedly, some big wholesale changes coming through later. Okay, what can you do as a trusted advisor? Again, I get appointed so often. I'm brought in to assist a client in dealing with the business, and they've had a customer that's gone insolvent. They've asked me to do a registration. It's too late, and they get quite annoyed at their advisor. In fact, they'll blame their advisor, whether it be the accountant and the lawyer. They should have, not only they should have warned them of the PPSR, they should have done the PPSR registration. So my advice to anyone who is advising their client on the PPSR is that they need to advise them of its existence, how they're affected, and they're not going to do it for them, and what they need to do. I have draft emails I've sent out a number of occasions after each presentation that explains just what I've said. And I've got 3 categories: retention of title, long-term hire, and asset protection. So if you have a client in that category, send them an email. We don't do it. You need to be aware, and you can speak to EDX, or you can speak to wherever you want. But it also shows them if they do have a problem a few years later, you as their advisor can refer back to the email from years ago saying, I warned you and you didn't want to deal with it. So by sending an email advising your clients, you're protecting yourself as well as your client. The message that today I want to give is there has been a wave of insolvencies in recent time, and it has started. I actually had tsunami wave, but I took tsunami and just put it back to wave. I don't think it's that big, but it's certainly a lot going on. The last PCI conference I went to was the ATO, and they said it was staggering how they've gone from a standing still start to thousands of winding up applications. They are really pushing for insolvency now if the matter can't be resolved. So you are going to get a wave of insolvencies. A valid PPSR registration is cheap. It's $6 for 7 years for each customer. It should be a part of your armory when your client's armory, whenever they're giving credit or they're hiring assets, you should be protecting yourself as well as your clients, and tell them you can't advise on the PPSR. Again, it's very generalised. I don't know of one accounting firm in Australia that actually performs PPSR registrations, and that goes from PwC down to the corner accountant store. There's not much money in it. It's too dangerous. You need to have a lot of volume to make it worthwhile. So that's where I get a lot of my referrals. Legal firms, again, I'm going to go 4 out of 5 legal firms don't touch this space. It's not worth it. They might have to do 1 or 2 registrations a year. And to try and understand 342 pages of the most complex legislation, to charge a few $100s to do a registration and then be sued for $10 million because that's the asset that they lost, it's not worth it. So again, a lot of accountants and lawyers, they need to make it known to their clients, we don't touch this space. It's very specialised. And it's just not an area that's worth them getting involved in. Now, that's a very, very brief PPSR update today. As I said, this is my 3rd that I've done, so I didn't want to repeat. I think this is the only 2nd slide I've repeated on this presentation from last time. And it was just what I'm seeing out there, the areas that are being used for registration and why, and the importance, if you're advising clients on what to do, is to let them know you don't do it, but you need to address the issue. And if they do or don't, that's up to them. Stephen, I might throw that little bit in the end over to you.
Yep.
I'm happy to answer any questions and what I'm seeing out there, but I know, and we had a chat just prior to this, that's very well for me to say that 50% don't register, and those that do are not doing it well. Stephen, are you going to call me a liar, or are you going to back me up on that one?
No, I'll back you up. There's a few things that you've mentioned, and that is that the very first thing that we do when we get appointed to a job is actually do a company search together with a full PPSR search, and that tells us what we're looking at in terms of assets and what have you. It's interesting, just anecdotally, some of the things that we're coming across, and it has been in for an awful long time, the PPSR, but similar mistakes are being made. So mistakes such as you've got a trustee, a company that's a trustee of a trust. The trustee is the trust is the one that's entered into, say, a financing arrangement or lease, typically, and the registration's over the company rather than the trust. We've actually, a lot of the assets, quite a few of the assets that we've recovered over a period of time, and even more recently, have come about because of invalid registrations for that reason. Another one is where you've got related entities, where, and you've made this point, with the related entities, they, typically an accountant will set it up where you've got an asset holding company and an operational company. There's no agreements between the two entities, but the operation company is using the assets, has for a long period of time, and the operation company then goes into liquidation, and then those assets then become available to the liquidator of that particular entity. So we see that a bit. One of the other things that we see is that a lot is that sometimes it's the most junior member of staff that are doing these PPSR registrations, and some of the assets involved are worth significant amounts of money, sometimes in the millions of dollars, and yet you've got a very, very junior member of staff that is trying to interpret what is actually a fairly complex form and trying to get it right. And of course, the ramifications if they get it wrong and the entity then goes into liquidation, or their customer does, can actually be quite significant. So they're the sorts of things that we actually see with this.
Yeah, Stephen, just on that, I do see a lot of that too. Often the one selected to do the PPSR registrations is the youngest person. And the youngest person must understand computers, IT, and the PPSR website. That's their only qualification. And we see it done so badly. And just on that, there was a case a couple of years ago where a motor vehicle financially registered a company by its ACN. But in actual fact, the lending agreement said ABC Proprietary Limited as trustee of the ABC Unit Trust. They only registered the company, and that one registration cost them $600,000 in a lost Ferrari.
Yep.
That's all it takes.
Yep. Yes, I agree. I mean, there's been ones where we've picked up Porsches and all sorts of things, and the common mistakes are being made time and time again. If you're not doing this, if you don't specialise in this area, someone like Andrew is the place to go for a fairly minimal fee, particularly given the significance sometimes of the asset value. So I can't encourage that more than enough. Now, if there's any questions at the moment, I don't think we have any. Chris, have we got any that you can see?
No questions
No?
at the moment.
Okay, all right. Look, Andrew, thank you very much for spending the time and presenting again to our group. I think it's a timely reminder, particularly in this environment, of what's actually going on and what's actually important. I can only encourage people to go and talk to Andrew if your clients have got problems or they need some assistance in terms of registering on the PPSR or need some advice in relation to it. So again, Andrew, thank you very much for presenting today. Thanks everyone for spending the last 30 minutes with us, and we welcome you back to the next Red into Black. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks.